Luckily, I'm an artist, so I have space to use my memories.
Tripoli, waiting for the ship, trip to Turkey, swag, whatever.
That was amazing. It was shocking for them to see Syrian refugees. They are like rock stars coming from the sea.
I saw the effects of war on me when I started doing music and art.
I couldn't resist that temptation to scream against the whole history of Syria, against the whole establishment that is called Syria.
Art can talk about politics, but politics can't ever talk about art.
It became like a wave of people leaving.
12 million out of the country, and the regime is still there.
Through the people that I've known.
I'm proud of what we did, this amazing movement that rose out of nothing.
Straight in my new mind's eye.
All those thoughts, it will never arrive to my brain if I didn't had that journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa, the crazy mother-daughter travel team and publishers of Big Blend magazines. So today we're excited to welcome award-winning filmmaker David-Henry-Gerson, and he's joining us to talk about his feature documentary film, The-Story-Wont-Die, and it's going through New York, LA, and then it'll be available on the 21st of June on video on demand. But this is really an inspiring story, but it's also really touching. It looks at the young generation of Syrian artists, and they use their work to protest and process what is currently the world's largest and longest ongoing displacement of people since World War II. Nancy and I always talk about art telling the truth, and I think this movie shows it more than ever, the truth of what art really does, and the power of art. And so I encourage you to go to the website, davidhenrygerson.com. So David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Hey, we're both a little shaky after watching that. We
I
just
know.
finished watching, and it's just, we always say this, that art tells the truth. And I think your film shows it more than we've ever seen of the truth of that. And did you feel that making it, like how powerful art is?
I talk a lot about something that I call the Van Gogh effect, which is basically, we've seen a Van Gogh painting so many times, right? We've seen Starry Night on backpacks and on, billboards and every place, that by the time you actually go to the museum to see the image, it takes a good few minutes of looking at the image before you really see the painting afresh. And I think the same is true for something like Syria or Refugee Crisis. A story that maybe we've seen on the news or seen many times before. Somehow we need to bypass the Van Gogh effect. And I found that these artists in this film, brilliant, really inspiring artists, have done exactly that, have found a way to talk about something that is virtually impossible to really grasp. Sometimes the scream or the cry or the emotional song can capture a feeling of a crisis more than when we sort of grow numb to certain imagery. And I do feel that these artists have a way of channeling that truth in a very precise and very impactful means. And I felt honored to be able to work with them and share their stories with you and with everyone else who gets a chance to see it.
Yeah, I think you're really right. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
It's not often that you get to talk to someone that has lived through what you're talking about, what you're seeing on television like that. Sometimes I think we went from the small TV box to big screen just in order to make it new and fresh, to look at what you're seeing in a whole new way. Now it's bigger than life with some of the big screens. Before, you're like at this, like a computer screen, a small one, and you're watching it, but I think there's part of your mind that goes, this is only television, doesn't make it true. So they got a bigger screen, and you're like, okay, now it's a little overwhelming. But then you're right, the Van Gogh effect, you get used to it, and you have to remind yourself these are real people with real stories.
And that's what's overwhelming, right? I mean, this,
Yeah.
unfortunately, things are changing at the moment in Ukraine. But until this current war, this was the largest displacement of people since World War II. 13 million people, at least internally displaced, I think around 6 million people leaving Syria. Numbers are very hard to grasp. You know, I grew up, my family were survivors of World War II, and the numbers from World War II and the Holocaust were very hard to grasp in and of themselves. And I found that in a way, this film was me trying to understand my own father in certain regards, and what my family had been through, but also understand this massive crisis in Syria that is ongoing. And by meeting people and by sitting down and having coffee with people and going into their studios and seeing their work was really just inspiring and made everything much more concrete, made everything much more real. You know, when you look in someone's eyes and you're able to see what maybe they're not saying, that too can be equally as impactful.
I think one of the things too from the film that we get is, you know, you think about refugees and you think about everybody on foot walking, you know, to a camp, basically. You get that imagery. And we look at the refugee crisis, not just war, but climate change is there. These are two major things that our world is going through, and we can either ignore it and get angry, don't let people in, do let people, I mean, it's this big drama. But when you realize that not only are there bombings but there's brutality and torture, and a lot of these artists went through torture, they went through family loss of loved ones, but the torture part, I don't think a lot of us actually realize how bad that torture part is, and that dude is still out there, you know?
That dude, there's one of the lyrics that the rapper speaking of, he says, the driver of this car is weird. Okay, this was his, to avoid initially being tortured and put in prison for your lyrics in a song. He made up, you know, things like that dude or the driver of this car is weird to protect himself. And I think one of the things for me as an American making this film that was most eye-opening was really keeping track of what does it mean to lose freedom of expression. What does it mean that if you just write a song, you whisper something to your friend, and the fear that you're being listened to constantly, that if you post something on Facebook, and as Tamama Zahn says, even just a like on Facebook could get you arrested, imprisoned, tortured. And some people have been tortured, imprisoned, tortured as well, for years. You know, there's some people who are still in prison after 10 years.
That's crazy.
This to me really made me appreciate what that freedom of expression is and how important it is. And of course, as you were saying earlier with politics, it's challenging to figure out who can be allowed in and this and that, and how do we welcome the stranger. But at the very base, to see, like you said, the humanity of the situation, I think we all need to start there. And that was my aim in making this film.
I absolutely agree. It transcends the politics.
Right. That's the goal.
And it's hard if you have never lived outside of this country. It is really difficult to put your mind in that mind space of not having the freedom to do and say what you want. It's really hard to go there, you know, especially for people who, you know, World War II and maybe, Vietnam. Some people have experienced Vietnam, but we certainly didn't experience it here at home, other than, you know, the occasional protest and the political aspect of it. But it's really difficult if you have never lived in a country that has some kind of strife going on. And if you've never lived in a country where in 20 minutes outside of a big city, you see people in mud huts and barely being able to survive and feed themselves. If you've never seen that in the flesh, not on TV, I think sometimes that reach is very difficult for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Even for me, I mean, of course, I had seen seen a lot on the news and did a huge amount of research before beginning the film. But for example, going to the refugee camps in Greece and Lesbos, like you said, seeing it in the flesh, and even it's so hard to describe. Even the smell and the sights and the feeling of claustrophobia, and this was some of the most overwhelming things I've ever seen. I mean, the Moria refugee camp in Greece was a place built for 2,000 that at the time we were filming there was housing 14,000 people.
Wow.
So, you hear of the Tower of Babel. This to me seemed the closest. There were people from 73 nations from around the world in this one camp.
Wow.
That's just so hard to fathom. It's something to be there, and we tried to bring audiences into this world, into these stories. That's not me. That is me.
No. That's cool. But
that's funny.
I think but that talking about how many countries, right? How many countries have these refugees? It's mind blowing. But when I'm thinking about going out there, talking to people who have gone through it, filming them, capturing their story, that had to have an effect as a filmmaker too. I mean, actually stepping in there, and did you feel a big responsibility putting this together and even going, okay, now it's done, the final touches are done, we're going to release this? I mean, how much pressure do you feel?
A huge amount. I mean, one of my favorite lines in the film is from the musician Bahila Hijazi. Bahila was in the first all-female rock group in Syria called Karma Band. She says a great line in the film that basically says, we're tired of being lab rats for documentaries. I'm not the first person to go out there. Many of these people have been on BBC, CNN, been around many times before. So I felt both an obligation to tell something different, to show a new face or maybe a more intimate portrayal of what this journey looks like and feels like. And certainly there's 8 different artists in the film, and to balance the voices and not make anyone certainly avoid cliches, not make it feel as if everyone is the same, really to show the differences and varieties of experiences. There's people who have high economic, low economic, religious, really we have a not to mention the different artists, musicians,
right?
So I did feel an obligation to everyone in the film to portray their voice, and really worked with them as much as possible to show them cuts and to develop the story together and make sure everyone felt that their story was being told. Around our world, we have heard many disparaging things said about immigrants and refugees. I'm certainly in this country because my father was an immigrant and a refugee. I think many Americans at some point in their lineage are immigrants or refugees.
Absolutely.
And so I felt an obligation to really, portray these new friends of mine as friends, as collaborators, as the people that inspire me, and hopefully use that inspiration to counteract any of the sort of negative terminology and policy that we've seen around the world.
Well, their art is amazing. The visual, the music, I mean, and it's all different. I mean, that to me, I was like, here's this intense story that we need to grasp as, individuals and communities. But at the same time, I'm going, man, listen to this music, listen to the words, look at this art. I mean, it's like incredible. So there's this other side of the documentary to me, was discovering these artists, and some I'd actually recognized. I'm going, I remember, I know this, but not putting all of it together. So I think that's this whole other part of your documentary, was like, here, check out these amazing artists, so, and I thought the connection to Berlin was interesting. I was just going back to like David Bowie when he was over, so there was all of that as well. But what led you to say, okay, because there are a gazillion refugee stories out there, I mean,
for sure,
that aren't told, and from a gazillion countries, unfortunately. What led you to say, okay, I'm doing Syria? Was it just these giant numbers of displaced people?
Sure. I think there's something like 85 million refugees on the planet today.
Oh my
And like
gosh.
you said earlier, with climate change, that's not
Yeah.
going to get any better.
Yeah.
Syria was the largest displacement since World War II. I think I grew up being told to never forget. And something about that fact that this was the largest since World War II just really got me paying attention. I made my thesis film from the American Film Institute called All These Voices, was won the Student Academy Award in 2016. And, that was a film about artists processing World War II. And here was the biggest crisis since World War II. And something in my DNA said, I've got to pay attention to this. And that was my first instinct was, who are the Picassos? Who are the Goyas? Who are the David Bowies? Who are the people who are processing war? And what does that look like? Can you do it right away? Does it take time? Does it take a generation? What is the impact on your life as an artist to process war? And then just on a very basic level, like you were saying, what's some of the great art that's out there? And finding some of this music and paintings and all of the different work, for me, it was a great opportunity to meet some amazing artists and to really
and having women's voices in the arts there too, because we've been doing some stories as well, and part of this refugee crisis, you're starting to see a change in women's liberation a little bit more too, as they travel out of a country that maybe their voice was, shunned for being a woman. You're not allowed to be, an artist. You're not allowed to have opinions or thoughts. You need to just be this. So, there's this hugely negative thing going on, but at the same time, we're seeing stories of women being able to have a voice through all this negativity. And I think that you showed that too in this.
Doesn't it take some kind of, what's the right word? Some kind of thing that is wrong in order for art to develop? I mean, if everything was perfect, would anybody be painting? Would there be a reason
It'd all be flowers and fairies.
Well, that's what I mean. Would there be anything to say? If there's
this is one of the questions I'm really looking at in the film. Do you need darkness in order to search for the light? And who are the people that are doing that work of going through that to try to find something? I don't know the answer, but I do know that a lot of great art has come out of conflict. And I grew up, my grandmother had this print from an artist from Germany named Katie Kollwitz. This is horrifying print after World War I. And I sort of grew up seeing these images, very, very powerful works expressing the horrors of World War I. And I just, again, feel that kind of like I was just in Oslo at the Oslo Freedom Forum with a bunch of amazing, inspiring activists showing them the film, and went to the Munch Museum and saw the Scream painting. And I do feel like that painting, that image of that sort of horror is really, really what we need to remind ourselves of these sorts of crises that are very easy to forget about.
And through arts, you're able as an individual to take it in without someone telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And that's the important part. A lot of times we're like, you must do this, you need to take care of this. And art allows you to come to your own reasoning at that, I think that's the power of it.
It's also a reminder about just how fragile, like we are lucky living in the United States today, but our democracy is not just forgiven. We have to protect it, and we have to protect our freedoms. And over the last few years, there's been some times where we used to live in Kenya, and we lived in South Africa, we lived in England. And there's times I used to feel like we're headed towards Africa right now. We're going backwards.
We just lose our voice.
Yeah, that we could lose our freedoms under certain
rulers.
Rulers, I don't care.
Dudes.
It is certainly something we must be aware of. And
exactly. And you can't just, turn on the TV, watch the news, and go to bed and not think about it, because that puts us in line to lose what we have. And, you know, it's very conscious to me after living in Kenya, in particularly, where you saw a real strive for freedom by the Kenyan people. And it took them a long time. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And I feel like we're very fortunate, but we can't close our eyes. It could happen here. It could happen.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think in the best way to make sure that you maintain your freedom of expression is express yourself.
Exactly. That's it. Let's get Madonna on. Thank you so much, David, number one, for making the film. I think, and everybody that worked with you to put it together. It is incredibly well done, and it just inspiring is a small word for what you've done. So everyone, The Story Won't Die is out in, it's going to be out in New York, Los Angeles, but on video on demand platforms like Apple TV, Amazon Prime Video, Google TV, Vimeo, all those great places. So watch for that on Refugee Day, World Refugee Day, which is June 21st. And keep up with David, go to his website and go watch his music videos too. David-Henry-Gerson.com. They're cool. Go watch them. It's really, you've got some awesome artists. And we want to thank the National Parks Arts Foundation for sponsoring today's show. They are awesome. They give a 1-month residency for artists, whether you're a filmmaker, a musician, a writer, poet, painter. You can apply to have a month-long residency in various national parks around the country, from Hawaii Volcanoes National Park to your own private island on Dry Tortugas National Park in Florida. So check them out at nationalparksartsfoundation.org and keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much.